Lembas.
Bantu Jews.
One small
Tribe maintained their customs for thousands of years. Why is he so hype? Jews.
That is correct. There's a tribe of Jews in Zimbabwe, and also South Africa, Malawi, and Mozambique, in the form of a Bantu-speaking ethnic group called the Lemba.
כבר 3 שבועות שרון וג'ורג' מתארחים בישראל. השניים בני שבט הלמבה מזימבבואה, שבמשך 2,500 שנים מקיימים מנהגים ומסורות של היהדות.
People always asked us, who are you?
I was born a Jew of the Lemba tribe.
Shalom. Anako amande sadiki madrora Lemba boy. Lemba boy siyamba ndi mwana wa mushavi, ndi mulemba, ndi muheberu, ndi bava Israel.
My name is Modric Mayeresera, and I'm a Lemba Jew, and I'm a father of 2.
Valemba bava Israel ngi Judea. Umrawa dzinwa dzamzi una uwa na va Israel na dzimwe chaka.
Ni mashironi. Sithusena Salemba, batho bana ba Lemba ba tswa ho kae, se qadile ho kae pele se tlo kgona ho fitla mona Afrika.
Hawa balemba ndi Majuda. Hawa balemba vo vangi ni Israel.
You are a Jew.
This is a great one. Sorry it's been a minute. So, if you've been watching my channel or just generally big-brained, you know that there are many, many groups of Jews in sub-Saharan Africa that have been there for thousands of years. Also, if you've read the comments on my Igbo Jews of Nigeria video, or just generally understand the lasting impacts of European imperialism on scholarly research, you know that sub-Saharan Jews are having a tough time being accepted as Jewish by contemporary scholarship and, most unfortunately, the broader Jewish community. But one of the reasons I'm hyped to be making this video is that besides Beta Yisrael of Ethiopia, the Lemba people's Jewishicity is probably the least controversial amongst black Africans. I'm sorry, Nigerian, Somalian, Sierra Leonean, Liberian, Senegalese, Ghanaian, Cameroonian, Tanzanian, Kenyan, Ugandan, Malagasy, and Cote d'Ivoirian Jews. We'll get there eventually. The total Lemba population is estimated at 50,000 plus between the 4 southern African nations whose borders happen to divide them. You may have noticed that the number 50,000 is a trash population estimate, and in fact, it's actually worse than it seems. The 50,000 figure was roughly estimated in 2002, and never re-estimated since. That was 20 years ago. So hop to it, demographers. Hop. An article from World Jewish Congress estimates that the population is 70 to 80,000 people, which sounds good, and Kulanu puts the number at 150,000, which sounds even better. But they don't cite sources, so I'm going to go with 70,000 plus because that's what Dr. Rudo Mathiva, a member of the community who's been leading the charge on this, estimated, and 70 is better than 50. Let's talk about religious and cultural practices first this time, so you can see why people suspected some Semitism was afoot. The Lemba observe Shabbat.
We had, it was called Chisi, like the day of rest. People would rest from all the work, but not knowing like why we are resting. Then we realized, no, we've been keeping Shabbat.
They sit Shiva after a death. They practice male circumcision.
Azumanga aziri ne basha rechi misazingo. Ngaure zenezo baone na bibili na mangwaro bibili ni yamba zori ba ruba rine.
They keep kosher.
Unless we have slaughtered it ourselves, we do not eat.
And like pork, would you eat pork?
No, impossible, impossible. Why would you ask me about pork?
Including how an animal must be slaughtered. A citation I found from a paper in 1926 says that when the Bantu of the area prepare meat, the animal is generally killed by means of a spear thrust to the heart, except among the Lemba, who always cut the throat. Interesting.
That's kashrut. And my dad was very strict about it. You know, we would visit other relatives who are not Lemba. Like, we were not allowed to eat there. I wasn't allowed to eat there. I had my own, would carry my own food. I would eat alone.
I even saw that some groups don't mix meat and milk. One source said they have a rite of sacrifice called Pesa, which is similar to Pesach, or Passover. They discourage intermarriage, and they have washing rituals. It's wild. So about the name Lemba, we could do the whole people speculate the name Lemba comes from this thing, but nobody has a definitive answer thing. But I won't. I'll link some stuff about it. Could be Chalemba, Swahili word for turban, not what I said, what I meant. It could be Lembi, a Bantu word for foreigner. It could be a place, it could be anything, not getting into it. Anyway, the oral tradition that they've passed down lines up perfectly with a usurious origin. Let's get into it. According to oral tradition, their ancestors left Judea 2,600 years ago, for some reason.
Zino ava valemba hoba unadzindwa nyinji nga chipinga chakale cha kumakulu kwasho. Zino osika chipinga cha musi uchido tubiwa ava valemba vachiswa angini Mesopotamia ngangwa wa 586 BC.
Eventually settling in a place somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula called Senna, or Senna I. The semi-sacred status of Senna to the Lemba has led many to look for it, and the consensus seems to be that it was in the abandoned town of Sana'a in Yemen. Now, while that might sound obvious at first, Sana'a is not an uncommon name and could easily be mistaken for Sana'a, a town in Oman, Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, or Sana, the latest anime girl to break my heart. Also, Yemen seems like a safe bet, having historically been a haven for Jews. In fact, it is the location of one of the few, very rare SSR Jewish states outside the Holy Land, the Himyarite Kingdom, Jewish between 380 and 525 AD. Very, very interesting. Video coming eventually, I hope. Anyway, the history and dates are muddled after Yemen, so grain of salt all of this. For an unknown reason, the Lemba ancestors left Senna I and migrated into Africa. According to Dr. Rudo Mathiva, they were led by the House of Hamisi at this time and were called the Basena, or the people from Senna. Once in Africa, the Basena split into two separate groups. Some stayed in Ethiopia, where they linked up with the Falashas, which, side point, is Falasha really a term we should be using? Because it means like outcast in Amharic. Side point. What a cool Semitic language. But yeah, it might be like calling the Welsh, like, nobody cares, but it was an old English word for foreigner or slave, and Kimru is the appropriate word. I don't know. Anyway, some linked with Beta Israel in Ethiopia, and the rest kept heading south along the coast. They settled in the region that is now split by Tanzania and Kenya, and they built a new city called Senna II. I was trying to think of something I could say about, like, naming being super hard, or the place so nice they named it twice. Well, the name so nice they placed it twice. Whatever, I didn't do it. They probably didn't call it II either, but they should have, because it would be real confusing when the Basena split again and a group led by the House of Bakali built Senna III in Mozambique. The name so nice they placed it thrice. Unfortunately, no one made a Senna IV that we know of. A group known as the Bamwenye went to Malawi, and another group led by the House of Seramani settled in Chiramba, Zimbabwe, and became known as the Balemba. Some of the Balemba kept going south in Africa and ended up in a place Europeans would eventually call South Africa. All of this is oral, and we don't have concrete dates because it's rough to interpret. They claim to have built Great Zimbabwe, which would have put them in southern Zimbabwe by the 9th century, thereabouts.
We also believe that we built the Great Zimbabwe. The Great Zimbabwe is a stone walled city. In the olden days, it served as a trading post. From there, trade between Africans and at first Arabs, then later on the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Swahili was coordinated from Great Zimbabwe.
But other groups dispute these claims pretty heavily, like the Shona and Venda.
Normally, we do not claim that we built the Great Zimbabwe because there are other tribes in Zimbabwe who claim that they built the Great Zimbabwe, and we try by all means to be politically correct.
In 1777, an Austrian guy named William Boltz was told by locals that the Balemba built the stone edifices and gold mines of the ancient city, and a guy named A.A. Anderson was told the same thing a few years later, which could point to them being there, but, nothing concrete.
We believe we built the place.
At the very least, we know that their existence was known of by Europeans from about the 17th century or so on, so they must have settled before then. I hate to rely on the Europeans, but sometimes you have to. Now, an interesting point about all those groups splitting off. According to Magdel Leroux's doctorate thesis from 1999, which I found the full PDF of, links in the description, score, many of these offshoots didn't know that there were others still around, and they didn't know until the 1960s, but they still shared the same religious practices that were not typical of the groups around them. That's difficult to do if you're faking the funk. Something to think about. And Magdel Leroux's did end up getting her doctorate in religious and ancient studies, by the way. Congratulations. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the British came and noted their existence. The Lemba called themselves children of Abraham, who came from a place in the north called Senna, and many Euros remarked that they might indeed have a Semitic origin, but it wasn't until the late 1880s that any European called them Jews. Paul Kruger, 5th president of the South African Republic, seems to have gotten credit, and according to Gideon Shimoni, Hebrew University of Jerusalem something or other's book, Community and Conscious, the Jews of South Africa, Europeans, quote, began to call them Kruger's Jews, end quote. He goes on to say, quote, Jews in South Africa were neither particularly aware nor entirely oblivious to the existence of the Lemba, but they were never regarded as more than intriguing curiosity. Harsh. The Lemba path to recognition was rough. Being located mainly in areas that were conquered by the British Empire was, from what I hear, not a pleasant experience. When those colonial areas became Rhodesia and South Africa, life for all Africans living there was equally, if not more so, unpleasant. So, quick history of apartheid. Please do your own research because I'm going to be so brief and there's a lot of fucked up history to it. New Africa has a video on it. I'll link it. I like that guy. Watch it. I'm just running through it so you know what the Lemba were going through. So, 1600s to 1833 is straight-up chattel slavery, whack. In 1833, the UK abolishes slavery throughout the empire, and South African legislature adapts the law, making former slaves indentured laborers who are basically still slaves. The Cape Colony has a system that allows men of all races to vote, but they shut it down in the 1890s. Africans and Asians have to carry passbooks to travel. 1905, the vote is taken away entirely, and black people are limited to fixed areas. All the South African colonies are combined in 1910, and black people are no longer allowed in political office. Then they aren't allowed to buy land, forced into slums. Residential segregation is passed in 1923. Black people aren't allowed to practice skilled trades. South Africa becomes sovereign in 1931. In the 50s, they start passing what are called the Grand Apartheid laws, no race mixing, segregation, home states for ethnicities, etc. South Africa becomes a republic in 1961. Of course, black people can't vote. Mixed people can't vote either. Yikes, yikes, yikes. Violence in the streets. Brutal repression. It's making capitalism in America look bad during the Cold War. 1985 thaw. 1991 everything breaks down. 1994 Nelson Mandela and the ANC win elections. April 27th is Freedom Day. Also, from 1965 to 1979 there was Rhodesia, which was awful. I had a section about Mugabe and the economic collapse, but it was really long and I have a few more rants I wanted to include, so I'll summarize that real quick. Mugabe was surprisingly religiously tolerant, and the economic collapse was really rough for everyone. It got better because they switched to the US dollar, and it's rough again now because pandemic. If you haven't guessed, which you have, you're smart. The Lemba were subject to all of this. They resisted where they could, with Judaism being one way to organize, such as the formation of the Lemba Cultural Association to protect Lemba rights and culture during apartheid. It was led by a man named M.M. Motenda, and describing themselves as Jews in their literature, their mission was to preserve Lemba culture and history.
The Lemba Cultural Association, it thomile neng le hore why e le hobaneng e le bohlokwa.
My lady, shalom. My lady, say shalom. 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 Shabbat. Shalom.
Shalom.
Mafungo akor You know, LCA ngamaleta achikuwa. Lemba Cultural Association. Yo purpose wanga 1944. Aiwa kabakara. Otuwa bomutenda mbelengwa. Vorasi vechele rapakatai Hamisi Madima. Na mwana wabo basafu. Batuwa na mwana wabo mtswale vokudzingana Petros. Vaya vondo hamkala mtswale zore. Valemba bakotomo barangana lwa chote bakoherana. Rina muhumbulo wa utoma association yoba kuvanganya yauwisa mvelele yavori vadivane vadalelana
ningazo vachisedza vadovana na emblem ya vurine ya ndou hangeni vasedzangi muravo vadovana una star kana neledzi na ndou nga ngomu ine havakotsi na n'wana ndi Dafita na Solomon.
He stood off with the police to get Lemba in his passbook, Small Nonviolent Resistance, but you do what you can to resist the Bantustan program. On his deathbed, he said, "Pray for the Lemba. Don't speak many words. Just say, God, our Father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, did you leave this nation to die away? Ask the Lord, is he leaving the Lemba people to die?"
Chavo uvachecho chichecho vabvangi Israeli. Osika zvino chikadziya panda chivonera ngadzi symbol na dzisaini.
You know, the Europeans, of course they're foul. But the European Jews, no effort to recognize the community. I mean, Jewish or not, Jews should have known better than to participate in an apartheid state. But there were Jews. I know Mandela wrote, "I have found Jews to be more broad-minded than most whites on the issues of race and politics, perhaps because they themselves have historically been victims of prejudice. And I know the stats that half of white South Africans who were charged for fighting against apartheid were Jews, despite being like 0.3% of the population. And I love y'all for that. But the Jewish institution stayed quiet until 1985. That's type shameful for the broader Jewish community. Y'all could have at least helped them make Aliyah or something. Even after apartheid, there was no reaching out. It took Tudor Parfit, an English Christian, to finally get them recognized. And that is what I would call a bad look. Let's not do it again, I say, knowing full well that we're doing it again. If I can do anything with this channel, I'd like to convince you that if people say they're Jewish, practice Judaism, and have done so historically, you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't gatekeep. Unless they're like those Christians who pretend to be Jewish as part of their weirdo missionary shtick. Gatekeep the fuck out of them.
We are going to establish more congregations. That way we will be countering or stemming the tide of the evangelizing Christians and Muslims. We have been taking advantage of the vacuum that we had foolishly created.
If you believe Jews will be tortured eternally in Dante's Inferno, I don't think you can jack Judaism. Anyway, our boy Tudor. The year is 1984. He's just written a book on Ethiopian Jews after Operation Moses. He's giving a lecture about it in South Africa. Who shows up to a lecture about Jews? Jews. Now, the majority are white, but he notices there's a group of black Jews wearing yarmulkes also in attendance, keeping to themselves. His science brain is intrigued. Ethiopian Jews are one thing, it's literally right there. But all the way down here? He goes over to pester them after the lecture, and this is quoting from an interview he did with Nova. They said, "You don't seem to believe what we're saying. Why don't you come spend a weekend with us? We'll show you our fellow Jews and introduce you to our elders so you'll see that what we're saying is true." So off I went to the northeast corner of South Africa in the area of Venda, and in the course of the weekend I could see that it was almost certain that they must have some kind of Semitic connection because all of their pre-modern religious and social practices seemed to be imbued with a quality that was essentially Middle Eastern, essentially Semitic. So I went back to England and, thinking that this would make a great research project, returned the following year and spent many months living with the Lemba in Africa. This wild boy documents the oral tradition, goes to Yemen, finds Senna 1, and writes a book, Journey to the Vanished City, in 1992. Boom. Then he finds the Ark of the Covenant. Huh? Okay, I'm not sure about this one. The Lemba have a sacred artifact called the Ngoma Lungundu that was traditionally carried into battles, so Tudor theorized that this was the Ark of War, Or rather, like a 700-year-old copy of the original Ark? Maybe. So anyway, everyone calls him Indiana Jones for that, but is he done? He's not. It's 1996. Humans know about DNA now, so Tudor conducts tests. Middle Eastern origin confirmed.
Zwezwo itwa nga 1996 kha bugu ya Tudor Perfect. Nkhazo zwa wanalo ri malofha avo ndi one ane atofana navo kwa.
He's surprised to find something called the Cohen modal haplotype, which is a signature element of the DNA of the Jewish priesthood. Interesting. Now, the gene smiths come out. They run big and broad tests amongst the priestly subclan of the Lemba, the Buba. They find the presence of the Cohen haplotype all through that DNA, at levels higher than the broader Jewish population, and at concentrations equal to, if not higher, than the Kohanim of other Jewish groups. That's a result 100% consistent with their oral tradition and shows that despite thousands of years passing, they still have Levites. Wow, wow, wow. Thank you, Tudor. We stan a righteous Gentile. So yeah, is it foo? No. And I guess I just spoiled that several times over, but asking is part of my system by now. They are indeed not foo. The genetic testing shows that despite considerable admixture, their patrilineal DNA shows their relation to all other Jewish groups, particularly through the Cohen modal haplotype, which shows levels comparable to Sephardi, Ashkenazi, and Mizrahi, and all the other little groupings. Something super cool that I didn't know about before diving in for this video is Y chromosomal Aaron, or the most recent common ancestor of the Jewish priesthood, or Kohanim, which would be Aaron, brother of Moses, according to the Torah. According to some researchers, you can use the Cohen modal haplotype grouping to trace all the world's Kohanim back to a single ancestor, which includes the Lemba's Buba clan too. This is obviously super dope. Now, there's some debate back and forth. It seems like Wikipedia says that the science people proposed it, then other science people said it wasn't conclusive, then more recently some new science people have said there's some data for it again. Who's right? I don't know. I'm not a genealoger. I just thought it was cool. Here's a study from 2017 that I don't understand. Anyway, despite this absolutely incredible genetic find, there is one issue which you may have picked up on. Patrilineal. While the evidence is solid, neither it nor the oral tradition show any matrilineal Judaism, which is required to be considered halakhically Jewish. This has led people like the aforementioned Gideon Shimoni to say things like, in terms of halakha, the Lemba are not at all comparable to the Falasha. As a group, they have no conceivable status in Judaism. That's literally how you sound right now. I don't want to be too tough on the guy because he did have some good info from earlier I got from his book, but people are basically saying if they want to be recognized, they have to convert. And that's a big load of hooey, if you ask me. Big glob of hokum. I've said this before somewhere on my channel, so I'll say it again. I like that Judaism is matrilineal as a custom, you know, little shout out to the ladies, but it is in no way textual. The Torah doesn't make that distinction except through frickin' vagaries. Jacob legitimately birthed the patriarchs of 4 Israelite tribes on non-Jewish women. Dan and Naphtali were the children of Bilhah, and Gad and Asher were the children of Zilpah. Also, Laban was out here worshiping idols, so what's really good with Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel? Here's a good quote from Shane Cohen, something of Jewish something at Harvard. The pre-exilic, before the exile, portions of the Hebrew Bible are not familiar with the matrilineal principle. Numerous Israelite heroes and kings married foreign women. For example, Judah married a Canaanite, Joseph an Egyptian, Moses a Midianite, and an Ethiopian, David a Philistine, and Solomon women of every description. How I feel. If you're Jewish enough to have been murdered during the Holocaust, you're more than Jewish enough for me. They have a proven, unbroken patrilineal link. So yeah, kind of a tangent there. But I'm Team Karaite with this one. Stop being lame, guys. We deadass knocked it out of the park with this one, genetically, historically, spiritually, emotionally, and y'all are still trying to caveat this win with Talmudic ephemera. Chill out, you nerds. Okay. How are the Lemba today? They're good. While all the various groups practice their Israelite traditions, the majority of the Lemba are Christian or Muslim. This makes sense, sort of. Islam is a pretty similar religion, all things considered, and Christianity was basically enforced by the state under Rhodesia. Many people identify as Jewish but are religiously Christian, similarly to the Igbo. There are communities of practicing Jews, and they built their first synagogue in 2015. There had been synagogues in Zimbabwe before. The first was in 1894, and it was a tent, but this was the first Lemba one, which is nice. I think they've built 2 more since then, but it's hard to confirm. I know there were at least 2 and plans for a 3rd.
That the first synagogue ever for us in I don't know how many years is going to be just a stone throw away from Great Zimbabwe is very important for us. We translated the Agada into Shona, so it had Hebrew, transliteration, English, and Shona. We are creating a feeder river that will go on to refreshing the water that has gone stagnant.
Yeah, here's a fun fact. Those of you who aren't balls deep in the lore might not be aware, but there is one type of bug that is kosher: the locust.
Particular food or prepared food that you would say is traditional?
Maybe I would say locusts and crickets.
Locusts and crickets. The Lemba are probably the only Jews in the world that actually eat crickets and know the difference between the kosher and the unkosher crickets and locusts. And when I heard that, I was convinced that they just didn't get it from going to a Christian school and reading the Old Testament. There's nobody that can read from the Chumash and actually determine what a kosher or unkosher locust could be.
The Lemba actually eat the kosher locusts and avoid the non-kosher ones. That's crazy dope to me. Here's another fun fact. The Lemba aren't the only group of African Jews in Zimbabwe. Sort of. There are also the Rusup Jews, a Jewish-ish community founded by a man named Albert Christian, who was himself converted in 1903 by William Saunders Crowdy, the founder of the Black Hebrew Israelites, or tied for founder with Frank Cherry. Crowder's Judaism is more Jewish, though, seeing Jesus as not a god, but a prophet. Not exactly Jewish, but the Rusup Jews seem like lovely people. They are not Lemba, though. There are Lemba in Rusup, and the communities are distinct. Finally, I want to talk about Sebastian Lemba, a Lemba man who was enslaved in early 1525 and brought to the Spanish colony of Santo Domingo on the island of Hispaniola, which was the first European colony in the New World and is today the Dominican Republic. Lemba rose up against the Spanish around 1532, formed a maroon colony in the mountains, and organized an army of a few hundred Africans to fight against the Spanish. Quoting from the Encyclopedia of Slave Resistance and Rebellion, he, quote, utilized guerrilla tactics to fight the Spanish on the island. Spanish authorities themselves acknowledged that the African rebel was an able military leader. He often split his men into smaller groups to attack rural settlements, sometimes leading the raids himself. His rebellion lasted for 15 years until the Spanish captured and killed him in 1547. R.I.P. to a 1500s Maccabee. He has a statue in his honor in modern-day Santo Domingo. Rest up, King. Anyway, where are Jews? Zimbabwe. Confirmed.
Kosha bread, motsa. Ndi zwiḽiwa zwe mudzimu a laedza kha Exoda kha Tora. A tshi vhudza Vhaisiraele uri Vhaisiraele kha vha ite hovhu vhurotho. Hovhu vhurotho ndi vhurotho he ra vhuḽa musi ndi uri tshifhinga tshoṱhe zwi ri tshi ita vhuṱambo ha Paseka, ha Passover. Ri tshi khou humbula u pfukekanya musi ri tshi khou Passover u bva Egypt u ya Kanana.